Hello, welcome to the first of our Be Taught Sports screencasts. There'll be many screencasts along the way focused specifically on Unit 1 Anatomy for your BTEC exam, whether that be in January or in May, June time. Now the first thing we're going to look at specifically is the skeletal system. You will need a pen and a bit of paper, also maybe some highlighters that could help you highlight the key terms throughout this screencast. I'll also finish with an assessment and have a look at some specific exam questions that have been given out in the last couple of years. Now, what is on this video specifically? We're going to look at 4 different parts today. The firstly is the major bones of the body. Secondly is the postural deviations such as kyphosis and scoliosis. Then we're going to look at the axial and appendicular skeleton, and lastly types of bones. I'll finish the screencast by looking at a couple of exam questions for you guys to work on at the end. Now the first part I'm going to go through quite quickly. Reason being is you should know this pretty well. Whether you did GCSE PE or you did BTEC level 2 or you didn't do either, it's really essential that you know the key major bones of the skeletal system. Now on the right hand side you'll see there they are. There are 206 bones in total. Now luckily you do not need to know all of those, but you will need to know the ones listed on the right hand side. You'll need to make sure you can label them correctly, so rather than calling it a skull, you'll need to make sure you call it cranium. And things such as, the shoulder blade, you can't just call it that either. So make sure you're using the key terms. Now, if you're struggling with the types of bones before you've even watched this video, I suggest that's the first thing that you revise and get the notes down straight away. It's likely to be the first question in your exam. So I've had a look at a couple of papers in the last 5 years, and the first couple straight away are always about the skeletal system and the bones specifically. Alongside that, you need to make sure you know about the vertebrae column. Now, you guys might know it as the spine. Now, it's broken up into 5 different sections, and it extends from the base of the cranium and goes all the way down to the pelvis. And there are 33 irregular bones in total. Now, we're going to look at types of bones in a second. It actually equates to 40% of a person's height as well. Now, the 5 different parts of the vertebrae column start at the top, so cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, coccyx, and what you'll identify is the actual type of bone, the irregular, have pads of cartilage in between each one of the bones to ensure flexibility. Now, the key point here about your vertebrae column is it needs to have a neutral spine alignment. This basically means when your posture is very, very good. So if you look at the picture on the right hand side, the spine is actually kind of like an S shape, and there are 3 curves in total. Now that's when it is looked from the side. When you look at the back, the spine should look nice and straight. The posture should be nice and tall and straight as well, with no arched back. Now we're going to have a look at a couple of issues with the spine in a second. But when looking at the vertebrae column, that's what you should suggest. So it should be neutral spine alignment, which basically means side view should have 2 curves in total, sorry, 3 curves in total, like an S shape. When viewed from the back, it should be nice and straight. Now, unfortunately, there are postural deviations when people get born, or this also could be hereditary, or it could be down to bad posture throughout the year of the lifetime. Now, the first one we're going to look at is scoliosis. Now, as you can see there is a clear bend of the spine or the vertebrae to the right hand side. This can actually be to the left or right, and it's an abnormal curvature as shown in the picture there. Now, this normally happens in the middle section. Now, if we just look at the previous diagram, the middle section is the thoracic, and it is normally found in children, but believe it or not, actually can be affected by adults. Now, this is not down to bad posture, or it's not been linked to. However, we're not sure the reasons why it can happen. They are still doing scientific research. It also does seem to be inheritable. So that's the first one. Scoliosis, basically the abnormal curvature of the spine on the left or the right hand side. Now the second one is kyphosis. Now as you can clearly see, this is like a hunchback. This is also the excessive outward curve of the thoracic region. So again, the same region of the scoliosis. This results in a hunchback, and you normally see a lot of older people normally walking quite funny with their hunchback, and this is normally down to poor posture over time, or it could be actually a deformity of the vertebrae. Now you'll need to remember kind of what diagram goes to what type of deviation. So the way I try to remember it is scoliosis, think of it as an S, so the middle of the S is kind of bent out to the right, whereas kyphosis, if you use the bottom of the right of the K, imagine that as maybe someone using a walking stick, so they're hunched over. Just a little tip there how I would try and remember it. Now, moving on, again, this should be done in GCSE PE or BTEC level 2. You have the axial or appendicular skeleton. Now, two very simple diagrams on the right hand side. Now, the first one is the axial skeleton. Now, if you look at the bit that's highlighted, it is the main core or the axis of the body, and the main function of this is for protection and support. If you look at it, it is the main part of the body as well, whereas the appendicular, everything comes off it. So the axial skeleton actually consists of cranium, thoracic cage, which is the ribs and the sternum, and also the vertebrae column. Now, it doesn't include the pelvic girdle, so don't get confused with that. The appendicular attaches all of its bones to the axial skeleton. So this consists of basically all the bones that can move for leverage and actually produces movement. So we're looking here at the upper and lower limbs, the shoulder girdle and the pelvic girdle. And as I said there, the main function is for movement. You will need to know that as well, because they may ask what is the difference between the axial and the appendicular skeleton, and can you give some examples? And there is a very simple diagram to show that. Now, once you've finished actually understanding, firstly, the major bones, including the vertebrae column, and also the parts that we just looked at here, so the axial and the appendicular skeleton, you'll then need to know and identify the different types of bones. Now, again, this all should be quite easy for you because you should have done it before, but there are 5 types of bones in total. Now, there is a long bone, a short bone, flat bone, sesamoid bone, and irregular. Now, you will again need to know the characteristics of these bones. So basically, how are they made up? So if I asked you, what are the characteristics of a bike? You would say, well, there are 2 wheels, there is a seat, there are handlebars, there's a chain, etc. It's exactly the same with the types of bones that you'll need to know for the exam. Now, the long bone is longer than they are wide, such as the femur, ulna, and phalanges. The short bone are as short as they are wide, such as the carpals, tarsals. The flat bone is broad, flat, and normally thin bone, which includes the sternum, rib cage, and pelvis. A sesamoid bone, it should say held together within tendons, covered in cartilage such as the patella. And finally, the irregular shape, which doesn't fit into any other category, which is your vertebrae, which we've just been looking at. Now, again, if you're not too sure about this, stop the video, make some notes, and also make some notes on the different examples. But you will need to know what type of bones they are and how they are made up. Now, alongside the characteristics, you'll also need to know the function and examples as well. Now, again, there's the table, very straightforward. It's not paragraphs of work, but it's just the key bullet points that you'll need to know. So a long bone, the main function is movement, support, and red blood cell production, which includes the femur, tibia, could be the fibula, humerus, and radius. You've got the short bones, which are fine or small movements, shock absorbent, stability, and weight bearing, which are normally found in your hands. Flat bones are for attachment for muscles. Think about the sternum, the scapula, the pelvis, the cranium. Irregular bone, as we know, it protects our spinal cord, but also there is obviously movement there, which is the vertebrae. And finally, the sesamoid bone, which is for protection and reduction of friction across the joint, and that is your patella, which is basically your kneecap. So again, you will need to know that different parts of the functions and the examples that go with it. Now, obviously I've flown through that very quickly because it should be quite straightforward and it should be the minimum knowledge you know when coming into college. Now, what I've done here is I've now given you a couple of exam questions. There are 3 in total, so 2 on this page and 1 on the next page. What I'd like you to do is pause the video and give yourself 5 minutes in total. Now, 5 minutes is being very lenient, but for the first video I think it would be good to try. Pause the video, have a go at these questions, and then come back to the video to watch and I will give you the answers. So the first question is identifying the label B and E. The second question is to complete table 1, and there are a couple of questions there. And the third question is, although it says number 2, is talking about the postural deviations. Stop the video from now and have a go at these assessments. Now, welcome back. Hopefully you've got some answers to the 3 questions that I gave you. Now, looking back at the questions, the first one was the thoracic and the coccyx, and that's a point each, and that was obviously labelled in the vertebrae column, which I said to you, it does normally start with key bones. This second one was identifying the types of bone and also the function of the bone, which we've just looked at on this video. So there are long, short sesamoids you could have had. You could have had movement or blood cell production for long, weight bearing for short, or reduced friction across the joint for sesamoid. Obviously, if you had any other answers that we had in the video today, you're allowed to give yourself a tick as well and give yourself a mark. For example, a regular for movement or for protection would have been absolutely fine. There are 4 marks up for that one. And then lastly, you had to then look at the different types of postural deviation. And there was one mark for each, so 4 marks in total. Now there are only 2 different types that you should have done, which is kyphosis and scoliosis. Now remember what I said about the old person bending down. So kyphosis, you could have said about the rounding of the upper back, shoulders, or thoracic region, which obviously gave you a hunched back. If you just put hunched back, that's absolutely fine. Second one you could have put is scoliosis, and obviously you could have mentioned how his spine has a sideways curve as a shape of an S or a C. So hopefully you got some good marks out of that. So in total, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Give yourself a mark out of 10 to see how you did. If you got 3 or below, I think you should go back to this video and watch it. If you got 7 or above, then excellent, well done, that's really good. So there is our first Be Taught Sport lesson 1 on the skeletal system. I will be going through the skeletal system again with the next video, but this time we'll be looking at types of joints, but also the different types of bones and how they are made up and the key functions. Hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a like, subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more about Be Taught Sport.